In yesterday's video, I discussed the ominous possibility that the Democrats and the liberal media may be working together to oust Donald Trump as president, if not through the collusion with Moscow allegation, then through the 25th Amendment to the Constitution that allows Congress to remove a president if he's judged to be mentally unfit or unstable in performing the duties of his office. Now, that amendment passed in 1967. But back in 1920, 1920 and 1921, there was just such a situation, but there was no constitutional provision for it with Woodrow Wilson. Wilson had been very active in negotiating the Treaty of Versailles, ending World War I, and in promoting the League of Nations, which was founded at the conference. There was huge opposition to the treaty and to the League of Nations among Republican and isolationist senators. And while its confirmation hung in the balance in the Senate, Wilson embarked on a national speaking tour to try to sell the League and the treaty to the American people. Very strenuous tour, usually involving 2 or even 3 speeches the same day, lasted for more than 30 days. At the end, the tour was terminated abruptly when Wilson had a stroke and was completely devastated by it. He lost the ability to speak. He was partially paralyzed, and it was just a tragic situation. He had no confidence in his vice president, a guy named Marshall, and there was no provision for presidential disability. So his wife, Edith Wilson, took over most of the duties of the president. Edith was a very important figure in Woodrow Wilson's life. Wilson was married to Ellen Wilson. Some historians have even said the similarity between Ellen and Edith was deliberate on Wilson's part. And he was very devoted to her. And he took office in 1913. And when Ellen died in late 1914 or early 1915, Woodrow was completely devastated. But a year later, he had met and fallen in love with Edith Wilson. And after a year after Ellen's death, they were married. And during the war, Edith had a fairly symbolic role. She would go without meat on Mondays and without gas on Sundays and other stuff like that. She let the sheep graze on the White House lawn to save manpower and demonstrate the frugality that Americans were supposed to observe during World War I. But after Woodrow's stroke, Edith really moved into the role of president. She would decide what documents he would see, what information he would get. She would do the presenting. She would do the briefing. Nobody else was allowed in this, and nobody was allowed to see President Wilson, not even members of his cabinet. And at that point, there was a very tricky period going on when the Senate was negotiating the ratification of the League of Nations and of the Versailles Treaty in general. And many, many senators, particularly moderate Democrats and Republicans, felt that they basically approved of the League, but wanted certain amendments or certain changes in the structure to assure their vote for ratification. Particularly, they were concerned about surrendering American sovereignty to the League in things like declaring war and issues of that sort. And Woodrow was very stubborn about it, and after the stroke, much more stubborn. Many have believed that the stroke impaired his mental abilities and made it impossible for him to be a rational actor in those negotiations. In any case, he held the position of no modifications, no changes, no reservations at all. And the senators formulated a list of fairly moderate reservations that would be perfectly acceptable today, most likely, but Wilson steadfastly refused to touch them. And while it was clear that the treaty would have been ratified with those reservations, it could not be ratified without them. And the whole League died, the whole Treaty of Versailles died with it, was discredited with it, and it almost directly led to the events in Germany that led to World War II. And Edith Wilson was the one who kept communicating that the president wouldn't accept this, wouldn't accept that, wanted no changes at all. And the combination of a sick rigid, arteriosclerotic man recovering from a stroke, and a woman who was a strong enough woman to feel that she needed to buffer the outside world from him, reinforced a politically tragic position by President Wilson. President Wilson served his term, ending in March of 1921, so there was effectively a 16 or 17-month period in which Mrs. Wilson really ran the country. The Republicans sneered that Wilson was the assistant president, and that Edith Wilson was the real president, and that was not far wrong. Thanks for watching.